You wake up and the world is exactly as you left it. The coffee machine is humming. The sunlight cuts a familiar line across the floor. You know logically what you are supposed to do next. You have the plan, the meticulously organized schedule for your mental health, your career, your life. You've listened to all the advice. You know the importance of structure, of intentionality. And yet this morning the gravity of indifference pulls you back down. It's not depression, not the heavy, painful kind. It's something quieter, something more insidious. The absolute stillness of not caring. In clinical terms, we talk about apathy, a lack of feeling emotion, interest, or concern. And we talk about anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. But in reality, when they strike together, they are a singular, terrifying phenomenon, a total emotional shutdown. You have done everything right. You have exercised, you have slept, you have eaten the vegetables, you have reached out to a friend. And yet when you sit down to begin the day, the fundamental question that paralyzes you is not how to do it, but why. Because you no longer care if the plan works or not. This is the core pain that the original advice, the typical mental health strategy, fails to address. The advice works brilliantly when you have even a sliver of emotional fuel, a small hidden core of desire, fear, or ambition. But what happens when that core runs cold? When the very idea of improving your mental health feels like a pointless academic exercise? For many of us, these periods, the ones I call the black hole periods, represent massive, unavoidable setbacks. We stop, we crash, we retreat not because we chose to, but because we were suddenly incapable of initiating the necessary action. It is a terrifying realization that your own commitment to yourself is entirely dependent on a biological mechanism you cannot consciously control. This is the hidden crisis of the high-functioning introspective mind. You can see the solution, you can write the solution, but you cannot execute the solution. The usual response is self-flagellation. We blame ourselves for a failure of will. We believe we are simply lazy, undisciplined, or morally weak. But what if this is not a moral failure at all? What if it is a necessary, albeit painful, survival mechanism of the nervous system? The emotional insight we need to grapple with is the betrayal of the reward system. We operate under a tacit contract with our brains. If I exert effort, I will receive a feeling of pleasure, satisfaction, or pride in return. When apathy hits, that contract is broken. You make the effort, and you are met with silence. You are met with a flat, hollow echo. In those moments, the very idea of working hard on your mental health feels like running on a treadmill that promises a destination, but delivers only exhaust fumes. This is the loneliness of being present yet entirely disengaged. It is the core pain of the modern mind, having all the answers, but none of the emotional currency to pay for the journey. We must look beyond the symptom and understand the structural cause. To truly grasp the nature of this emotional shutdown, we must abandon the language of willpower and move into the language of function. Imagine you are driving through a dense fog, a complete sensory whiteout. You can see the GPS screen perfectly. The roadmap is clear. It shows the exact turns you need to make to get out of the mist and back onto the highway where the sunlight is. But you realize something chilling: you cannot feel the road. You can't feel the engine responding, you can't feel the grip of the tires, and you can't feel the shift in elevation. You are completely detached from the physical reality of driving. This detachment is not an accident. It is the glass prison of Anhedonia. You can witness your life, your goals, your relationships, your potential through the pane of glass, but you cannot touch or be touched by it. Everything is happening to the observer, not to the participant. For years, I, like many of you, mistook this emotional void for a personal flaw. When the apathy settled in, the instinct was to stop moving entirely. If I couldn't feel the pleasure of progress, why progress at all? The rational response becomes retreat to the couch, watch something distracting, or just stay in bed. These behaviors, while seemingly lazy, are psychologically logical. They require the least amount of emotional investment for a potentially neutral or even slightly positive outcome. But the real crisis is revealed when the fog begins to lift. You realize you have spent days, perhaps weeks, completely paralyzed. And now you are not just battling the lingering flatness, you are battling the massive logistical deficit you created. The dishes are piled high, the emails are unanswered, and the commitments have been broken. The emotional return, the satisfaction of a clean slate, is now impossibly high because the required effort is overwhelming. You find yourself feeling worse than before, the apathy trapped in a cycle of self-induced logistical failure. We need a strategy that survives the emotional void, a way to keep the machine running even when the pilot has gone silent. This is the difference between a life dictated by fleeting emotional states and a life defined by enduring structural commitment. The goal is not to feel good today, but to ensure the architecture of your life is sound enough to receive goodness tomorrow. The quiet realization that arises from the deepest apathy is this: when the engine of joy is dead, your structure is the only thing that keeps you from hitting the median. And for that, we need to understand the biology of the collapse. The failure to act during an apathetic phase is fundamentally a failure of the motivational pathways in the brain. It is not an issue of willpower, it is an issue of neurochemistry. We must simplify the science to remove the blame. According to numerous studies in neuroscience, the drive to initiate beneficial long-term actions like sticking to your mental health plan, exercising, or pursuing difficult goals is heavily mediated by the dopamine reward system. This system, stretching from the ventral tegmental area VTA to the nucleus accumbens and projecting into the prefrontal cortex PFC, is not primarily responsible for pleasure itself, but for motivating behavior based on the expectation of reward. Dopamine is the molecule of wanting the propellant of the engine. When we talk about deep, pervasive anhedonia and apathy, we are often talking about a severe dysregulation in this pathway. The neurons that should be firing dopamine to signal to your prefrontal cortex, PFC, the brain's planning and execution center, that a particular course of action is worth the effort, simply go quiet. Imagine the PFC as the CEO of your actions. It requires a compelling business case to approve any energy expenditure. The business case is the expected emotional return satisfaction joy piece. When the dopamine signal is weak or non-existent, the PFC receives the message, this action is not profitable. Energy expenditure is not warranted. The result is a complete functional paralysis. You know you should go for the walk, but the necessary neural computation that says going for the walk leads to a positive outcome is interrupted. The signal is dead on arrival. This helps us reframe the problem. You are not failing because you are weak. You are failing because the biological propellant needed to initiate movement towards a non-immediate reward has been systemically withdrawn. The brain has entered a conservation mode, shutting down the most costly processes, those requiring active emotional motivation to protect core survival functions. This is why basic tasks like scrolling through a phone remain possible. They are low-cost, immediately accessible behaviors largely governed by different, more primitive habit loops. But complex, future-oriented behaviors are dead in the water. Understanding this biological shutdown is the first step toward genuine self-compassion. It allows us to step outside the judgment trap and realize we are dealing with a structural problem. The solution, therefore, cannot be an emotional surge which is impossible to generate on demand, but a structural bypass of the collapsed motivational pathway. We must find a way to make the machine move without relying on the emotional fuel it usually requires. The psychological depth of the apathy experience lies in what I call the emotional dictatorship. For most of our lives, we organize our actions around the pursuit of a desired emotional state. We seek achievement because we want to feel validated. We maintain relationships because we want to feel connected. We avoid certain situations because we want to avoid feeling anxiety. Our emotions, in effect, act as the ultimate governing body, the dictator that sets the rules for engagement. This system is inherently fragile. As the video we are analyzing noted, living your life in pursuit of a feeling guarantees you will be riding an emotional roller coaster. When the feeling is present, you act. When the feeling is absent, especially for those with cyclical mood disorders or trauma-related emotional blunting, the entire architecture of your life is vulnerable to collapse. The primary response to this collapse is functional guilt. You feel immense guilt for failing to live up to the societal expectation of constant productivity, and more specifically, the expectation of feeling good about your productivity. This guilt becomes a secondary emotional weight, sinking you deeper into the black hole. You stop doing the things that are good for you, not because they feel bad, but because they feel nothing, and the nothingness triggers the guilt that makes you retreat further. Clinical models, such as those used in cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT), recognize this pattern as avoidance. But in apathy, the avoidance isn't just of negative experiences. It's the profound avoidance of emotional labor, the effort required to engage with the world when the internal system has no payoff. Why would you engage in a costly behavior like planning a future project when the forecasted emotional return is zero? It makes psychological sense to choose the path of least resistance. This is where the wisdom of the original idea, which I've refined as the Stoic Pivot, finds its anchor. The only way to survive the emotional dictatorship is to stage a quiet revolution to commit to a way of life that is entirely independent of emotional outcome. We must accept the psychological reality that our feelings are not reliable commanders. They are essential navigators, but they are also fickle and prone to severe error during periods of neurochemical dysregulation. The deepest work here is granting yourself permission to separate your self-worth from your current emotional state. Your value is not determined by the intensity of your joy or the effectiveness of your current mental health strategy. Your value is determined by your ongoing commitment to the structure required for long-term survival. When you remove the emotional payoff as the primary motivator, you reveal the true purpose of structure to serve as a fail-safe when the self is compromised. When the emotional dictatorship collapses, we are left standing in the rubble, forced to decide what, if anything, holds meaning. This is where we initiate the Stoic Pivot. This is the core psychological shift away from the hope of feeling good today toward the quiet, unwavering commitment to the self that exists beyond the current feeling state. The video we analyzed touched upon the idea of apathyception, not caring that you don't care. While intuitively correct, the language is too playful for the seriousness of the psychological mechanism. It's not about being amused by your indifference. It's about leveraging your emotional neutrality to enforce a commitment. The Stoic Pivot is an act of deep psychological responsibility. It recognizes that while your emotions are unreliable and cyclical, your long-term structural needs are not. You know with certainty that the black hole period will end. You know you will eventually wake up and feel a flicker of desire, a touch of curiosity, or even just the subtle pain of regret. When that moment comes, you do not want to be standing at the bottom of a logistical pit facing weeks of self-reparation simply to reach baseline. Therefore, the action you take today while feeling hollow is a respectful investment in the future self. It is a decision made in cold blood based on objective long-term utility rather than hot emotional impulse. In this state of apathy, your actions become a profound exercise in detachment from outcome. You are walking, eating, and working because these things are necessary for the system to remain viable, not because they deliver personal reward. This is a crucial distinction. When you detach from the immediate emotional outcome, you remove the primary barrier to action during apathy. The expectation of pleasure is the first thing that dies in the black hole, and releasing that expectation allows for functional movement. This insight fundamentally reframes the pain of the experience. The emptiness you feel is not a punishment. It is a neutral playing field upon which you can enforce pure structural integrity. You are proving that your capacity for function is more robust than your capacity for feeling. This is the ultimate quiet intensity, the ability to keep moving because you decided long ago that your survival was non-negotiable, regardless of your momentary enthusiasm for it. We must now give a name to this structural commitment: functional inertia. In physics, inertia is the property of matter that causes it to resist any change in its state of motion. If an object is at rest, it wants to stay at rest. If it is moving, it wants to keep moving. In the context of the apathetic mind, the goal is to establish a state of motion, even if that motion is minimal, so that the internal resistance to continuing the inertia of rest is minimized. Functional inertia is the strategic decision to prioritize process goals over outcome goals, maintaining the architecture of life even when it delivers no immediate reward. Let's break down why this is essential for survival. 1. The barrier of re-entry. As the original content noted, the primary danger of stopping is the logistical deficit. If you stop exercising, stop eating well, and stop working for 2 weeks, the inertia of rest becomes enormous. The energy required to overcome that internal resistance and re-establish the routine is exponentially higher than the energy required to maintain the routine in the first place. By adhering to functional inertia, you keep the required re-entry barrier low. You make it easier for the future self to regain momentum. 2. The habit bypass. This relates directly to the neuroscience we discussed. The basal ganglia is the part of the brain responsible for habit formation. Once a behavior is grooved into the basal ganglia, it requires significantly less energy and emotional input to execute than a goal-directed behavior. When apathy kills the dopamine-driven goal-directed system, you must rely entirely on the habitual system. Functional inertia means simplifying your life down to its essential repeatable rituals, making your bed, taking a shower, eating a meal at the same time, and allowing the basal ganglia to run the show. You are trading passion for persistence. 3. The low-bar threshold. To successfully maintain functional inertia, you must drastically lower the threshold of success. The aim is not perfection. The aim is continuity. If your normal goal is a 30-minute run, the functional inertia goal is simply to put on your running shoes. If your normal goal is to write 500 words, the functional inertia goal is to open the document. The power lies not in the magnitude of the action, but in the non-zero outcome. You are demonstrating to your nervous system that you are still capable of self-initiation, no matter how small the task. This practice is crucial because it keeps the neural pathways for action primed even if they are not yet being rewarded. By removing the expectation of a significant emotional payoff, you free yourself to simply perform the necessary action. This is the psychological equivalent of keeping the pilotless drone flying on autopilot. You are not trying to feel joy, you are simply refusing to let the aircraft crash. This refusal to crash, made without emotion, is the deepest form of self-respect. Now that we have accepted functional inertia as our survival protocol, how do we integrate this into the daily friction of the apathy period? The guidance here must be gentle, rooted in the understanding that you are operating at an energy deficit. We are not aiming to accelerate recovery, we are simply aiming to not regress. The key, according to established principles of behavioral psychology, is that action precedes feeling. For years you were trained that feeling motivation precedes action. Now in the absence of feeling, you must reverse the script. By forcing the small structural actions, you are increasing the likelihood of an eventual emotional return. You are creating the necessary behavioral arcs that the brain's reward system can eventually re-engage with. Here are the silent practices of the apathetic self. 1. The commitment to low-cost nutrition. Recall the powerful anecdote from the original video about eating healthy when food tasted like garbage due to illness. This is not just a metaphor, it is a profound lesson in utility. Normally, eating a salad is a high-cost emotional behavior because the reward flavor satisfaction must outweigh the effort. When everything tastes like mush, the apathy equivalent, you remove the entire reward variable. If you know you will not enjoy the triple chocolate cake any more than the plain Greek yogurt, then the logical choice, the high-utility choice, is the one that sets your future self up for success. Choose the healthy food. Choose the scheduled sleep. This is the moment to be radically pragmatic about self-care. It has nothing to do with virtue. It has everything to do with reducing the long-term inflammatory load on a nervous system that is already struggling. We are not doing this to feel good, we are doing this to stop feeling worse. This is pure objective biological maintenance. The goal is to survive this maintenance phase without creating a new preventable deficit. You are not pampering yourself. You are provisioning the machine. 2. The protocol of minimum viable structure. Your schedule during the apathy phase should resemble a checklist, not an aspiration. You are not striving for a good day. You are striving for a non-zero day. The only items that stay on the list are those that maintain the integrity of your life architecture. Self-care thresholds. Showering, brushing teeth, changing clothes. These are not optional. They are the boundary between function and complete collapse. Social maintenance passive. Send one pre-programmed text message to a trusted contact, not to ask for help, but simply to signal your continued existence. This prevents the isolation that compounds the apathy. The single most important task, SMIT. Identify the one task that, if left undone, would create the greatest negative consequence later. This could be paying a bill or sending a one-sentence email. Do that one thing and nothing else if you must. According to psychological research on inertia and decision fatigue, the act of starting is the most difficult barrier. By minimizing the complexity of the task, you reduce decision labor. You are tricking your brain into action by lowering the initial energy requirement to almost zero. You are telling your prefrontal cortex, this is not a high-cost activity, just press the button. This is not a period for growth. It is a period for structural persistence. Be gentle, but be absolutely rigid about your minimum viable structure. Do not judge the quality of the action, only the completion of the protocol. We conclude this journey with the quiet truth that the battle against apathy is not fought with a surge of motivation, but with the steadfastness of structure. You have learned to embrace functional inertia not as a cynical coping mechanism, but as a sophisticated psychological survival strategy. The deepest, most introspective lesson gleaned from surviving these emotional black holes is the realization that your capacity for function is independent of your capacity for feeling. This is a powerful, almost radical truth in a culture obsessed with emotional authenticity. In the future, when the familiar numbness settles in, do not panic. Do not interpret the emptiness as a sign of complete failure. Instead, recognize it as the activation of a necessary maintenance mode. You are entering a period where the high-cost emotional circuits are temporarily offline. Your only responsibility during this time is not to seek joy, but to minimize collateral damage. You are simply ensuring that when the nervous system decides to bring the emotional reward pathways back online, when the fog lifts and you can once again feel the road your life architecture is still standing. This commitment made without feeling is the truest form of self-respect. It is the non-emotional pledge to your future self that you will not sabotage their recovery. You are not fighting apathy. You are strategically bypassing it. You are respecting the reality that your emotions, like the weather, are cyclical and unreliable, but your need for shelter and safety is constant. The goal is not to eliminate these periods that may not be possible due to genetic and environmental factors. The goal is to eliminate the lag time between the capacity to feel well and the logistical ability to live well. You do not want the day you are capable of feeling good again to be the day you must spend clearing weeks of self-inflicted chaos. So accept the quiet. Commit to the minimal. Lower the bar, not in defeat but in strategy. Honor the process even when the outcome is silent. Because the action, however hollow it feels, is the only bridge leading out of the void. And you, the functional apathetic architect of your own survival, are the only one who can keep that bridge intact. This is not a call to stay positive. It is a commitment to stay functional.